there was an old girl that I was seeing quite often over there that her father was in the Air Force. And
For nearly 5 decades, a section of Graceland remained untouched, a place whispered about in fan forums and music circles, Elvis Presley's attic. Rumors swirled endlessly about what might be hidden away in the dim, dust-choked shadows above the king's beloved Memphis mansion. Some imagined priceless memorabilia. Others speculated about unreleased music, or perhaps something more personal. Diaries, letters, or tokens from the private life of the man who changed the face of music. But the attic remained locked, sealed off from the public and even from most of the estate's caretakers. Until now. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. After 48 long years, that attic door has creaked open. The occasion was not one of grand spectacle, not a televised event with flashing cameras and roaring crowds. Instead, a quiet team of preservationists and historians armed with gloves and archival tools ascended the narrow staircase with the care and reverence of archaeologists uncovering a pharaoh's tomb. What they found in the attic defied every expectation, rewriting what was known about Elvis Presley, not just as an icon, but as a man. The space itself was dense with time, a thick stillness settling over the objects stored in mismatched trunks and mildewed boxes. The insulation hung in tatters from the beams, and shafts of light sliced through the grime-covered skylight. But amidst the decay lay something extraordinary, a collection so deeply personal, so shockingly unfiltered, that even the most seasoned historians were left speechless. The attic was more than a storage space. It was a vault of Elvis's inner world. Tucked away in carefully packed containers were dozens of handwritten notebooks, not polished journals, but raw, chaotic scrawls of thoughts, lyrics, spiritual reflections, and philosophical questions. Some pages were stained with coffee rings, others smeared as though written through tears. These were not the writings of a superstar concerned with image. These were the private ramblings of a man wrestling with fame, loneliness, legacy, and belief. Reading through the pages was like being pulled into the whirlwind of Presley's mind. He mused on the burden of being adored by millions, the emptiness that sometimes followed a standing ovation, and the suffocating expectations of the world outside his mansion's gates. Alongside the journals were stacks of reel-to-reel tapes, some unlabeled, others marked with cryptic titles like Midnight Soul or Garden Confession. Audio experts have already begun the painstaking process of restoring these recordings, but early impressions are staggering. The tapes contain songs never before heard by the public, experiments that blend gospel with psychedelic rock, or blues with a haunting orchestral backing. Elvis was known for reinventing musical boundaries, but what lay on these tapes suggests a level of innovation he never revealed publicly. These weren't polished studio hits, they were intimate, raw, and often unfinished, a peek into the creative chaos of an artist constantly reaching beyond his era. Then there were the photographs, hundreds of them, stuffed into envelopes tucked between books, and buried under old costumes. These weren't publicity stills or concert shots. They were candid, unposed, and startling in their humanity. Images of Elvis sitting cross-legged on the floor of his living room, playing cards with friends. Photos of him crouched by a garden bed, hands dirty with soil. One particularly moving shot captured him asleep in a chair, a record still spinning on the player beside him. These glimpses shattered the illusion of the ever-perfect performer and offered instead the portrait of a man living between the cracks of his own myth. Perhaps the most unexpected discovery was a box labeled simply Mother. Inside was a collection of items belonging to Gladys Presley, his beloved mother whose death had devastated him in 1958, a perfume bottle, still faintly scented, a worn Bible with passages underlined, her apron neatly folded as if ready for Sunday dinner. But beneath these lay letters written by Elvis to his mother after her passing. Each was a soul-bearing confession, full of longing and grief. He told her about his struggles, about his fears, about the weight of carrying on without her. They were not written for anyone's eyes but hers. And yet, they now offered perhaps the most powerful insight into the man behind the rhinestones. Clothing was found as well, not the flamboyant jumpsuits known from Vegas stages, but pieces that told a quieter story. Flannel shirts with frayed collars, Denim jackets with handwritten notes stuffed in the pockets, shoes so worn they curved to his gait. Each garment suggested a version of Elvis far removed from the spotlight, a man clinging to normalcy in moments when the world expected him to be larger than life. Among these was a simple leather jacket with an embroidered patch that read, "Be kind, be real." The phrase appears multiple times in his journals and notes, like a mantra, a private philosophy whispered into the silence. There were also relics from his childhood, a rusted slingshot, toy cars, faded report cards with teacher comments that ranged from highly creative to easily distracted. These pieces formed a bridge between the boy from Tupelo and the legend who commanded the world's attention. It was impossible to hold these items and not feel the trajectory of a life that defied comprehension. And within it all, a strong sense that Elvis never fully outran that Mississippi kid who loved music for music's sake. Among the most mysterious finds was a locked wooden case hidden beneath loose floorboards. It took careful handling to pry it open without damaging the contents. Inside were objects that sparked immediate speculation, old film canisters with reels never released to the public, a faded script titled The Lost Highway bearing annotations in Elvis's handwriting, and a photograph of a woman no one recognized, signed on the back, "To E with all my heart, M." The identity of M remains a puzzle, one that already has researchers scrambling for clues. The implications are vast. A secret romance? A creative collaboration shelved away? The answers remain in shadow, but the mystery only deepens the intrigue. What makes this addict's revelation so powerful is not just the novelty of what it contained, but the rawness and authenticity that poured from every item. Elvis, often viewed through a lens of glitter and myth, emerges from these artifacts as intensely human, flawed, thoughtful, spiritual, even haunted. There was nothing curated or polished about this hidden trove. It was vulnerability in its purest form, and it challenges every tidy narrative about who he was and what he represented. This opening of Presley's attic also reframes the idea of legacy. For so long, Elvis was seen through the performances, the chart-topping singles, the gold records, and the image stamped into popular culture. But here was a man who had left behind not just a showbiz legacy, but a profoundly personal one. He had archived his own struggles and triumphs in a space no publicist could sanitize. The attic became a vault of emotional truth, not constructed for fans or fame, but left behind as if he knew, somehow, that one day the world might be ready to see him fully. Cultural historians have already begun dissecting the implications of the attic's contents. How do these discoveries reshape our understanding of mid-century American celebrity? How do they challenge the myth-making machine of the entertainment industry? And most importantly, how do they force us to reconsider the boundaries between public figure and private soul? Elvis was always aware of the machinery that surrounded his fame. These artifacts suggest he also resented it, resisted it, and in some ways, mourned the version of himself it demanded. Even in the smallest objects, a guitar pick taped to a torn lyric sheet, a half-used bottle of cologne, a dog-eared copy of The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, there's an emotional weight. It's as if each item contains an echo, a moment frozen in the long pause of history, and when all of it is viewed together, the result is a portrait not of a legend, but of a man standing on the fragile edge between being remembered and being understood. This discovery has also raised ethical questions. Should the contents have remained private? Would Elvis have wanted this inner world exposed? There are no clear answers, but what's undeniable is the magnetic pull of it all. Even those who were never fans find themselves drawn into the layers of complexity uncovered in that attic. It's no longer about music alone. It's about identity, memory, and the cost of becoming larger than life. In an era where celebrity has become more curated than ever, the attic stands as a raw counterpoint. There was no branding strategy up there, no carefully crafted narrative. There was only truth, however messy, however beautiful. The attic, long hidden above the carefully preserved halls of Graceland, contained a deeper sanctuary, a place where the performer could shed the costume and be simply Elvis, just Elvis. As researchers continue to catalog and study the items, more discoveries are expected. The attic may be open, but its secrets are still unfolding. Every page turned, every tape rewound, offers a new facet of a man who spent a lifetime trying to balance the love of millions with the solitude of self. What lies above Graceland now hums with new significance, not as a tourist site, but as a gateway into the mind and heart of one of history's most enigmatic figures. The attic's opening is not just an event, it's a revelation. A crack in the carefully sealed mythology that has, until now, defined Elvis Presley. The objects within don't just tell us more about the man, they demand that we see him differently. Not as the king of rock and roll, not as the jumpsuited icon strutting under neon lights, but as someone far more complex, far more haunted, and far more human. And perhaps that's the greatest shock of all. With the attic of Graceland now opened and the first wave of its secrets exposed, attention swiftly turned to the broader implications, not just for fans and historians, but for how culture absorbs, preserves, and even manipulates the memory of a figure like Elvis Presley. The discoveries didn't merely add color to the existing portrait of the man, they reshaped the frame entirely. While the public has long accepted the duality of Elvis, the performer and the person, the attic contents shattered the fragile barrier between those identities. And as the exploration deepened beyond the initial finds, what emerged was a labyrinth of layers, each stranger and more compelling than the last. Preserved in the darker recesses of the attic behind a wall of warped boxes was a trunk containing artifacts tied not to music or stage life, but to Elvis's intense, lesser-known fascination with the metaphysical and esoteric. While fans knew about his spiritual curiosity, his visits to numerologists, his study of various religious texts, nothing could have prepared them for the sheer depth of material found in that old cedar trunk. Inside were notebooks meticulously detailing dreams, symbols, and out-of-body experiences he believed he had. There were diagrams of sacred geometry sketched with remarkable precision, clippings from obscure metaphysical magazines, and annotated pages from texts on astral projection and the ancient mysteries of Egypt, Atlantis, and Sumeria. Elvis had underlined, circled, and cross-referenced concepts with astonishing diligence, often comparing them with passages from the Bible and his own internal reflections. These weren't the idle musings of a celebrity dabbling in mysticism, they were the focused inquiries of a man who saw connections between his existence and a much larger cosmic order. He wrote frequently about the voice, something he felt guided him at key moments in life, and speculated whether his fame was a tool for something greater or a test he was meant to endure and transcend. Beside these writings were crude blueprints for what appeared to be personal rituals or meditative routines, involving sound frequencies, planetary alignments, and fasting schedules. The pages were dated, revealing that this phase of deep spiritual experimentation occurred in the early 1970s, a time when Presley's public image was dominated by Las Vegas glitz and glamour. The contradiction between external appearance and internal reality became more glaring with every page. And then there was the map. Folded in the corner of a decaying leather pouch was a hand-drawn map of the Graceland grounds, annotated with markings and directional lines. The diagram extended beyond the known estate boundaries, reaching into neighboring woodlands and unmarked areas. Certain spots were labeled with terms like pulse, gate, and quiet zone. Others bore symbols, not words, runes, alchemical glyphs, and ancient numerals. At first, it was dismissed as a product of Elvis's more eccentric side, but further analysis revealed that many of the markings corresponded to known geomagnetic anomalies in the area. He had mapped energy flows, or at least what he believed to be energy flows, around his home, attempting to align Graceland with forces far older than rock and roll. In another part of the attic, concealed beneath a rug nailed to the floorboards, was a metal box filled with tape reels and photographic negatives. The tapes, after careful restoration, turned out to be long, rambling monologues, Elvis speaking alone into a microphone. Not rehearsals or lyrics, but spoken thoughts that mirrored therapy sessions or personal documentaries. These recordings revealed a mind processing fame like a person adrift in a foreign world, trying to tether his existence to something solid. He spoke of feeling split into avatars, fragments of himself that performed for crowds, smiled for cameras, and gave interviews, while the real Elvis remained hidden even from himself. The tapes included conversations with imagined versions of his younger self, his future self, and once, chillingly, with the voice he often referenced in his writings. The photographic negatives offered even more surprises. Among them were staged images, elaborate tableaus set up within Graceland's rooms. One series featured Elvis in various costumes, but not the rhinestone-covered kind. He posed in robes, tunics, military attire from different centuries, and even a monk's habit. The backdrops were constructed with detail and care, suggesting he or someone working with him designed sets reflecting historical or mystical periods. Was this a private art project? A method of self-exploration? Or perhaps a secret film that was never completed? No official records indicate these sessions ever occurred. The photos show a man trying on the skins of his ancestors, or perhaps of his archetypes, exploring his psyche through theatrical embodiment. Further boxes revealed an unexpected obsession with anonymity. There were wigs, fake mustaches, glasses, and even identification cards under various aliases. These weren't props from movie sets. They were carefully maintained and cataloged as though part of an emergency identity system. Some documents even contained receipts, travel notes, and journal entries under pseudonyms. It's now believed Elvis created a parallel system for escaping, not permanently, but occasionally slipping away from the glare of celebrity to exist unnoticed, if only for a day or two. This feeds into long-standing rumors of him walking among the public, unrecognized, in places like small diners or desert motels. What was once fan folklore now holds the weight of documented preparation. The attic also contained a cache of letters, not from fans or family, but from individuals unknown to the public. They were written in a variety of languages including French, Hebrew, Greek, and Arabic. Some were poetic, others formal, and many appeared coded. Their presence remains unexplained. Were these sent to Elvis? Were they written by him under different identities? Several included cryptic phrases like "the architect watches" or "the note is in the breath." The mystery of these correspondences remains open, but linguistic experts and code breakers have already been called in to examine them. In another container were detailed plans for a school. Yes, a literal curriculum Elvis appeared to have drafted. Titled The Center for Universal Learning. This hand-bound booklet outlined courses in music theory, comparative religion, dream interpretation, social ethics, and emotional healing. There were even schedules, role assignments, and admissions essays Elvis had apparently written himself as examples. Whether this was ever discussed with others or remained purely hypothetical is unknown, but it reflects a side of Elvis entirely absent from public life: the teacher, the visionary, the reformer, and tucked among these lofty ambitions were the intimate fragments that pulled him back to earth. A collection of love letters written but never sent, addressed to unnamed women, some known to history, others total mysteries. In one, he writes about watching her walk away through the green door, and everything in me wanted to follow, but I just stood there. In another, he describes the silence of waking up alone in a house that once echoed with music and laughter. These weren't the writings of a man surrounded by adoring fans. They were written in the late hours, when the house grew cold and cavernous, and the ghosts of his past came calling. Of particular note was a single, slightly yellowed page, folded and placed beneath a glass ashtray. It read, "If they knew who I really was, they wouldn't want the music. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the music is the disguise." In that single sentence was the gravity of a man who carried the weight of projection and expectation. He wasn't just performing on stage, he was performing life itself. As the exploration progressed, architectural features previously unknown were uncovered. A panel in the attic wall led to a cramped but finished crawl space. Inside was a narrow desk, a single lamp, and shelves lined with books. Not just any books, but texts on sociology, existentialism, Eastern philosophy, and suppressed historical narratives. There were bootleg copies of banned political essays, anti-establishment manifestos, and reports from global human rights organizations. This reading list revealed a man deeply aware of the forces shaping the world and perhaps disillusioned by the role he'd played in distracting from them. He underlined passages on cultural manipulation, media seduction, and the commodification of art. He wrote in the margins, "Am I helping them sleep or waking them up?" These aren't just interesting footnotes in the biography of a famous man. They are seismic additions to the cultural understanding of 20th century celebrity and identity. The attic contents strip away the mythic armor Elvis was given, or burdened with, and expose a figure who was profoundly self-aware, deeply curious, and possibly even revolutionary in ways history refused to recognize. As the attic was fully cataloged, one final revelation stunned the team. Beneath a heavy tarp obscured by decades of dust lay a full-scale blueprint of a building that never existed. Labeled Sanctum E, the structure resembled a spiritual retreat, complete with meditation chambers, sound halls, and what appeared to be a central dome lined with acoustic panels. The materials were specified: cedar, marble, quartz. Notes described how certain tones would resonate through the walls to stimulate healing and introspection. The dome, Elvis wrote, was a place where silence becomes music, and the soul remembers. It was a temple not to him, but to stillness, to awakening. What kind of man conceives of such a place at the height of his commercial fame? What kind of artist imagines escaping adoration to build sanctuaries? The attic doesn't just answer questions, it explodes them into a million radiant fragments. None of this was done for legacy, not in the traditional sense. These weren't items staged for biographers, nor were they curated for a museum. They were tucked away, hidden, protected, preserved not for attention, but perhaps because he couldn't bear to destroy them, or maybe because some part of him hoped someone, someday, would understand. The shock isn't in the objects themselves, though many are remarkable. The shock is in the breadth of the interior world they reveal. A world of passion, doubt, genius, longing, and resistance. A world that ran parallel to the sequins and stadiums, unnoticed and untouched, until now. And perhaps the most human part of this entire revelation is that Elvis Presley, one of the most watched and worshipped figures in modern history, kept his truest self in an attic. Not on stage, not in interviews, not in the glossy pages of magazines. He stored it above the ceiling, beneath insulation and time, waiting, hoping maybe, that one day someone would climb those stairs and find him there. Not the king, but the man. As the attic at Graceland continues to be excavated and studied, each layer unearths not just more items, but more complexity, threads of a life that defy conventional categories. The sheer volume of material has forced historians, curators, and cultural theorists alike to rethink not just Elvis Presley's personal narrative, but the entire apparatus of stardom that shaped and ultimately contained him. Nowhere is this clearer than in the revelations tied to Elvis's artistic process, a process far more expansive, deliberate, and experimental than the public ever realized. One trunk, sealed with aging twine, revealed hundreds of visual sketches, not doodles or casual drawings, but full compositions. Imagine stage designs, lighting layouts, costume blueprints, and even abstract art concepts. Some sketches reflected Elvis's live performances, but many did not. These were ideas for spaces he never performed in, theatrical pieces never staged, dreamscapes constructed through light, movement, and shadow. Notes written in the margins referenced inspiration drawn from silent film, vaudeville, kabuki theater, and even medieval morality plays. It became evident that Elvis was, in private, a director at heart, someone who envisioned immersive experiences that bridged the sacred and the spectacular. Accompanying these designs were thick folders of musical notation, most in Elvis's distinctive handwriting, suggesting he had at least some grasp of composition and arrangement far beyond what was previously attributed to him. There were entire suites composed for multiple instruments, including strings and horns, with clear dynamics and tempo instructions. One particularly stunning find was a series of compositions under the heading The Dusk Psalms. These were elegiac, almost liturgical in structure, blending spiritual poetry with operatic scope. Musicologists now believe this was Presley's attempt to create a new genre, a kind of Americana requiem, blending gospel roots with cinematic grandeur. Alongside these creative works was another striking collection, meticulously crafted fictional short stories. Bound in simple folders and written on typewriters long out of use, these stories explored surreal, often dystopian worlds. Themes included the collapse of identity under surveillance, the exploitation of dreams by corporations, and a recurring concept of a mirror town, a parallel world beneath our own, accessible only through moments of intense emotional clarity. These were not frivolous tales, but philosophical and politically charged narratives, often featuring protagonists whose lives eerily echoed aspects of Elvis's own. Men celebrated and isolated, lifted up and hollowed out. The literary style itself was sophisticated, poetic, and darkly prophetic. One unfinished manuscript titled The Boy Made of Sound chronicled the life of a child who vibrated with music from birth, making him both adored and feared by those around him. Eventually, his gift was exploited until he vanished completely, leaving behind only silence. That silence, the story hints, held more power than the music ever did. Scholars now studying the text suggest it reads like a spiritual allegory and a confession. Another dimension emerged through Elvis's early dabbling in filmmaking. Hidden beneath a floorboard in a locked cabinet was a narrow film reel, tightly wound and stored in a rusted canister. It turned out to be a 20-minute silent film directed by Presley himself, a deeply experimental work with jarring, symbolic imagery, a piano submerged in water, a man painting his face in reverse, a garden that aged in reverse from decay to bloom. Elvis appears in several shots, but always from the back or distorted through mirrors. The footage pulses with raw, creative energy, the kind usually reserved for the avant-garde film circuits of the time. There was no performance here, no fanfare. It was pure expression, urgent and abstract. The reel was labeled Project Oracle, no further context provided. The attic also contained material that hinted at a private disillusionment with the commercial music industry. Stashed away in a water-damaged filing cabinet were lengthy correspondences, letters never sent, addressed to music executives, television producers, and other key figures in the entertainment world. The tone in these letters varied, at times conciliatory, other times confrontational. He expressed frustration over being shoehorned into roles and genres that no longer reflected his evolving tastes or values. In one particularly searing draft, he wrote of becoming a stranger in the very sound I once called home, and warned of the spiritual corrosion that came with constant commodification. There were lists, too, endless lists, of things Elvis wanted to do but never could. Projects titled Desert Communion, Sky Choir, and The Whisper Sessions appeared again and again, always crossed out or followed by notes like, "Won't let me," or "No budget, no time, no one listens." Some lists read like inventories for film productions, others like personal to-do reminders with bizarre entries. Find the Dream Interpreter in Baton Rouge, record silence at midnight, visit Stone Circle with Lisa. These mundane fragments offered flashes of a deeply active inner world, one that never seemed to stop planning, wondering, or dreaming. One box, nearly crumbling from moisture and decay, was filled with nothing but letters to his daughter, Lisa Marie. These spanned over a decade, many written in hotel stationery or on napkins and paper scraps. Some were clearly never intended to be sent. They were musings, messages to a future version of her. Others were half diary, half instruction manual, filled with emotional vulnerability and spiritual guidance. In one, he describes watching her sleep and being overwhelmed by a fear he couldn't protect her from the fame machine. In another, he outlines how to recognize true people from those who only walk toward noise. There was also a notable absence, a kind of silence that ran beneath the discovery. Despite hundreds of boxes and folders, there was very little directly referencing his fans. Not because he dismissed them, but perhaps because they belonged to the public-facing Elvis, the one everyone already knew. The attic, it seemed, was reserved only for the pieces he couldn't share or perhaps didn't know how to. And so, in a space filled with human echoes, fan mail, stage memorabilia, and signed posters were conspicuously missing. Instead, there were notes to God, letters to the self, and questions scribbled into the margins of books like Siddhartha, the Upanishads, and On the Road. There was a striking pattern that emerged across all these materials, a kind of recursive plea for transcendence. Whether in music, film, literature, philosophy, or spiritual exploration, Elvis seemed to be chasing the same thing, a way to leave behind the icon without abandoning the man, to preserve the soul while escaping the statue built around it. This tension pulsed through every tape, every drawing, every worn scrap of paper. What was shocking was not that Elvis had a private world, most celebrities do, but that his was so vast, so detailed, and so deliberately hidden. It was an archive of the soul, not the spotlight. And yet, even with all these revelations, the attic has not yielded closure. If anything, it has multiplied the questions. What would Elvis have done with this work had he lived longer? Would he have revealed it in time? Was he planning something? A final project, a manifesto, a great act of artistic shedding? And did he hide these pieces to preserve them, or to bury them forever? The nature of the attic itself, not just as a storage space, but as a psychological vault, makes every object within feel sacred. This was a place where Elvis could finally be invisible, where he didn't have to perform, explain, or be understood. And yet, paradoxically, it's only in that silence that he's finally being seen in full. What the world adored was a symbol. What the attic contains is a human. As the team documenting the attic continues to work, more discoveries await. A secondary crawl space was found behind the brick chimney, and initial scans suggest more sealed containers. Already the tone of their work has shifted from that of preservation to reverence. They no longer speak of Elvis Presley the performer when referring to the attic. They speak of the man, the seeker, the architect of a private cosmos. What lies above Graceland then is not just an archive, it is a challenge. To look again at what we think we know, not just about Presley, but about every person forced to live through the filter of fame. It is a warning about the limits of spectacle, the cost of deification, and the loneliness that often follows greatness. And perhaps most movingly, it is a whisper from the past reminding us that even legends dream of being understood, not as myths, but as men. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Elvis's attic being opened? What do you expect inside? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.